Part 1 was as big as a craps dice roll as you could possibly fathom. There have been numerous attempts, including one made by David Lynch, that tried to capture the imagination of the epic inspiration of many science fiction films and novels, but none of them have captured the glory of Frank Herbert's dense book quite like Denis Villeneuve's adaptation. Executing the project with an enticing script of intergalactic politics and conspiracies, a clash between houses, and Paul Atredies' prophetic destiny of becoming a leader, Villeneuve's unfilmable passion project became an accomplishment critically and financially. With an impeccable ensemble cast, visual effects that took advantage of its budget, and otherworldly, well, world building. So successfully that it spawned the sequel that we are reviewing currently. Especially given the fact that it was released in the midst of an outbreak that put the entire nation almost on pause, and that production contracts were only reserved for just the first installment. Even while proclaiming how great Dune Part 1 is, I still do not believe that it is as great and as masterful as his previous works like Blade Runner 2049, Arrival, and Prisoners. I also gotta say that for the majority of the first 2 months of 2024, except for Netflix's haunting and breathtaking Society of the Snow, the films that I've seen theatrically were more nastier than the smell of expired cod. But it's nice to have a change of pace after watching a bunch of mediocre and Madam Web caliber movies, and after waiting for several months since its delay due to the 2023 Writers and Actors Guild strike, it brings me such joy to finally witness the film that is the epitome of what science fiction majesty in the modern age of Hollywood looks like. Dune Part 2 is the sequel to Dune Part 1 that we have been waiting for. Whereas Part 1 represents the buildup of what was to hopefully come in the future, Part 2 is the culmination of what Dune fans have been anticipating for years on end, and it improves upon Part 1 in every conceivable way. Even the pacing, which I have made a complaint about in the first one, has improved in the second. There is never a dull moment or ounce of filler that plots in the entire picture. Everything is extremely poignant, nuanced, and action-packed, and serves as an emphatic reminder that Denis Villeneuve's artistic persistence and attention to detail are without peer, as both a director of independent and blockbuster filmmaking. From where we left off in Part 1, well, the entire Atreides household has been eradicated and fried to a crisp by House Harkonnen under the command of Emperor Shaddam IV, portrayed in this film by Christopher Walken. Everyone in the army and bloodline has been killed off, except for our main character, Paul Atredies, his Bene Gesserit mother, Lady Jessica, and a few other survivors like Gunry Halleck, who hid from the assault. Taking refuge in the Fremen civilization, Paul and Jessica try to learn the ways of the Fremen for the sake of their own survival. Flash forward to Dune Part 2, Paul has become one with the Fremen, has developed a relationship with Zendaya's Chani, and led the Fremen to numerous skirmish victories against Harkonnen troops, while Lady Jessica takes up the mantle of being the Fremen's Reverend Mother by means of spreading the prophecy that Paul is the Lisan al-Gaib, or in other words, Messiah, to bring the Fremen prosperity. Due to Raban's losses and spice production failures against the Fremen, Baron Harkonnen turns to new leadership in his young nephew, feyd-rautha, to take claim of Arrakis. For his political ambitions and path of avenging his father's death to be complete, Paul must ally with the northern and southern Iraqis to defeat the Emperor, all the while being consumed by disturbing visions of what may come if he were to be the savior that the Fremen have been praying for. Part 2's massive improvement in its storytelling is that despite how long and straightforward it is, it spends most of its time fleshing out characters even further from how they progressed since their introduction in Part 1. Thanks to the brilliant story of Villeneuve and company, every single one of the main characters is entangled with their own motivations and ideologies, each being just as convincing as the other, recognizing the responsibilities that they have to take, and are willing to make sacrifices even at the cost of relationships and ill-fated visions that may or may not happen. And because of how well Villeneuve knows his characters, it makes up for interesting narrative turns and plot points and payoffs that are incredibly satisfying and allows the actors to immerse themselves into their parts. Furthermore, the film still manages to impress me with its world building just as it did previously. Each amount of information and tools that are used are never ruined from expository dialogue or showing more and not telling at all. They're all clearly presented in a way that is digestible and doesn't insult the audience's intelligence. It's incredibly comprehensible and even fascinating to witness such things like the Fremen's ways of survival, how they adapt to certain properties, their religious systems, and how their beliefs differ. Same goes for the antagonists with the scope of their homeworlds, their superb costume design utilizing chainmails, silk, and armor, resembling something close to an extraterrestrial version of the Middle Ages, havens, and their political strategies to dethrone the Atreides bloodline. It's some of the most satiating world building I could ever recall since the original Star Wars and Lord of the Rings, and with how successful this movie is doing currently at the box office, I can't wait to where the third one takes us next. Going into the acting, I've already explained in part 1 how poised and collected Timothée Chalamet was as Paul Atredies, and with his performance in part 2, it shows just how much his character has evolved since the events of the beginning. Transforming from the son of a duke trying to live up to his father's expectations into a brilliant tactical leader driven by the ambitions of revenge and liberating his allies to paradise. The defining moments that encapsulate everything sensational about his performance is twofold. One of which is when he brings such authority and commanding presence when he declares himself in front of the Fremen that he will take responsibility as the messianic figure in their own native language is done in such a way that we've never seen in his entire career. And another where he's driven to such dread and turmoil because of these constant visions. One of those visions being, shall he attempt to lead the Fremen to victory, he might cause endless suffering down the road, which thematically brings in such an interesting conversation about the importance of religion, whether or not it is real or a propagating fantasy, as exemplified by Paula and Jessica's decision-making as means for retribution, and different ideological perspectives from both the northern and southern Fremen tribes, whereas some pray and believing in ancient prophecies, and others consider those exact prophecies to be fictitious and do nothing but weaken and hinder them from accomplishing their goals. Speaking of Lady Jessica, Rebecca Ferguson, just like in the first movie, is fantastic as ever. And I know I mentioned this before, and I'll repeat it again just in case you didn't hear it, but Academy, give this woman an Oscar nod. She's one of the best actresses working today. I don't know how else I'm going to repeat it to you. Her intelligence and relationship with her son are all present and accounted for through her fierce line delivery. Whether it's being a persuasive reverend mother for the natives, trying to stand alongside her son as a way to lower the tensions, or even injecting vulnerability in her character when she's contemplating a decision that might in fact kill her. A ton of the Part 1 veterans, from Josh Brolin to Javier Bardem, are given more to do with their characters and carry themselves with enriching, charismatic performances. And Zendaya, who was hardly in the first film, has more brilliant characterization and, much like Rebecca Ferguson, plays such a significant part in the story, not just as a romantic love interest, but as one who soulfully cares about her people's survival against an oncoming threat. For a film with an already astonishing cast, the newcomers involved are also just as fabulous. Christopher Walken's extraordinary, Florence Pugh's incredibly graceful as Princess Irulan, who is the daughter of the Emperor. But when it comes to spotlight stealing, Austin Butler embodies the psychopathic feyd-rautha to a T. From his introduction all the way to the film's climax, his acting is ferocious, malevolent, and everything that you could possibly ask for in a demented mirror of the main character. And the beauty of Part 2 doesn't end with the story and the characters, because what else is there to talk about other than the film's euphoric visual effects? Whereas last year's blockbusters had incredibly high budgets but would put such little effort into not just the story but the visual effects, like The Flash and Indiana Jones and the Dial of Cinematic Seppuku, with Part 2 you can feel the budget being put into every aspect of the world building and its superb action set pieces. The visual effects of the spaceships and other vehicles still look impressive with their immaculate sound design. Even visual creatures such as the sandworms still look jaw-dropping with their texture and compositing. The planets and homeworlds look visually breathtaking, both in their futuristic architecture from palaces to underground fortresses, and the movie's vibrant color palette adds to the splendor of the film's scale. The most eye-popping instance of all is the Harkonnen Arena scene taking place underneath the Black Sun, all of which is emphasized by Greg Fraser's flawless cinematography and shot composition. The great use of depth of field, aerial and wide shots during battle sequences, even establishing shots of the world which are too good even for IMAX standards. Nearly every frame of this movie looks like a majestic painting that could rival even Vincent van Gogh's artistic masterworks. Finally, I may not be a gigantic fan of this composer, but Hans Zimmer's score is truly powerful, even soothing at times. His sweeping use of classical strings during scenes of romance will make the heart fall in love with the music. And when the action kicks into high gear, from the pounding of the drums to the whimsical woodwinds to the inevitable French horn buzz, it grabs onto you like a vice grip and never lets go. Dune Part 1 was the stepping stone of a potential franchise. Dune Part 2 is the apex of what many sci-fi fanatics and bookworms of Frank Herbert's series have been craving to see. An epic cinematic space opera that demonstrates some of the most arduous, imaginative filmmaking, production, and world building not seen since the titans of blockbuster and fantasy media like Star Wars, Game of Thrones, and Lord of the Rings. All conceived by the talented hands and visions of one of the greatest auteurs in all of modern Hollywood. Call me a pretentious cinephile on the internet, but this movie right here is what modern science fiction cinema is all about. My name is Luke Nukem. May my review blow you away.